The courthouse stood tall and quiet as the evening settled in. Most of the rooms were dark now, with only a few lights still burning in scattered windows. Outside, the parking lot had emptied, except for a handful of cars belonging to the cleaning staff and one sleek black sedan. In his office on the third floor, Anthony Clark closed a thick folder and rubbed his tired eyes. He had just won a major case that afternoon, one he'd been working on for months. As a federal prosecutor for 15 years, Anthony specialized in cases involving civil rights violations. Today's victory should have sent him home with a smile, but there was still so much paperwork waiting. Just another hour, he told himself, checking his watch. It was already past 8. The building felt different after hours, peaceful in a way it never was during the day. No hurried footsteps, no whispering attorneys, no gavel sounds echoing down the hallways. Just the occasional hum of a vacuum cleaner or the squeak of a cleaning cart's wheels. Anthony stretched in his chair when he heard a small tearing sound. Looking down, he noticed his suit jacket had caught on the edge of his desk drawer, leaving a 2-inch rip along the seam. Great, he muttered, slipping it off to examine the damage. That was his favorite jacket, too, the one he considered lucky, in court. He walked to the small closet in the corner of his office and slid the door open. Behind his spare suits hung something unexpected, a gray maintenance uniform. Anyone who saw it might have been confused, but for Anthony, it was a reminder of where he came from. Before law school, before passing the bar, before becoming one of the state's most respected prosecutors, Anthony had worked as a janitor. Night shifts mopping floors and emptying trash had paid his way through college and then law school. Sometimes, even now, when a case was particularly stressful, he found cleaning oddly comforting, a simple task with immediate results, unlike the complicated legal world he now inhabited. Anthony touched the fabric of the uniform, thinking. His torn jacket gave him the perfect excuse. He'd changed into this uniform a few times before, helping the evening staff when he worked late. They'd become friends over the years. Ray from Haiti, who told the funniest stories while vacuuming. Lee, who hummed Chinese folk songs while polishing the wooden benches. And Gabe, who'd been working here even longer than Anthony had been practicing law. He quickly changed into the gray uniform. It still fit perfectly, though he rarely had reason to wear it anymore. The name patch read, Maintenance Staff, with no specific name. Perfect anonymity. Anthony stepped out of his office, locking the door behind him. He walked down to the supply closet on the second floor where Gabe kept the cleaning equipment. Hey, what are you doing here so late? Gabe's friendly voice boomed as Anthony entered the supply room. Won that Reynolds case today, Anthony replied with a grin. I heard. Congratulations. Ray told me he saw you still working when he cleaned your floor. Yeah, too much paperwork to finish, Anthony said, reaching for a mop and bucket. Thought I'd help out a bit before heading home. Tore my jacket anyway, so. He gestured at his uniform. Gabe shook his head but smiled. Most people who make what you make don't even see us, much less help us. But you never changed, did you? Some things shouldn't change, Anthony replied, filling the bucket with cleaning solution. The familiar pine scent brought back memories of his struggling student days. Where do you need help tonight? Main courtroom on first floor could use a mop. We're short-staffed tonight. Miguel's kid is sick. I'm on it, Anthony said, wheeling the bucket and mop toward the elevator. The courtroom where he'd won his case just hours ago now sat empty and dim, with only security lights casting long shadows across the wooden benches. Anthony found it oddly fitting to be cleaning the very floor where he'd stood to deliver his closing argument that morning. From prosecutor to janitor in the same day, a reminder that titles didn't define a person's worth. As he pushed the mop across the polished floor, his mind wandered back to the case. It had been a tough one, proving that a company had systematically discriminated against black employees. The evidence was there, but the defense attorney had been clever, trying to explain away each incident as a misunderstanding or coincidence. In the end, the pattern had been too clear for the jury to ignore. Anthony worked his way from the judge's bench toward the main doors, lost in thought. He'd almost finished when he heard angry footsteps stomping down the hall outside, accompanied by a loud voice. No, I don't care what time it is. I left critical documents in that courtroom and I need them for tomorrow's appeal filing. This is exactly why I hate dealing with the public defender's office. Complete incompetence. Anthony recognized that voice even before the courtroom door flew open. Wilson Price, one of the most expensive defense attorneys in the state. Anthony had never faced him in court, but his reputation preceded him. Brilliant legal mind paired with an absolutely awful personality. Price burst through the door, his expensive phone pressed to his ear, not even noticing Anthony at first. He was tall, with perfectly styled gray hair and a suit that probably cost more than what most people in the building made in a month. "I'll call you back." Price snapped into the phone before shoving it into his pocket. Finally, he noticed Anthony, and the wet floor between him and the defense table where he apparently needed to go. "Move that somewhere else," Price commanded without a greeting or even looking directly at Anthony. "I need to get through." Anthony calmly replied, "The floor's still wet, sir. It'll just take a minute to finish up this section, then you can—" "Did I ask for your life story?" Price interrupted, his face twisting with impatience. "Just move your equipment so I can get my documents. Some of us have actual important work to do." Anthony took a deep breath. He'd dealt with all kinds of people in his career: criminals, witnesses, victims, judges. He knew when someone was having a bad day versus when someone was simply showing their true colors. "Sir, I understand. You're in a hurry. If you tell me what documents you're looking for, I'd be happy to get them for you while you wait here. That way you won't slip on the wet floor." Price's face reddened. "Are you serious right now? You think I'd let you touch my legal documents? Do you even understand what attorney-client privilege means?" Anthony nodded politely, still holding the mop. "Yes, sir. I understand confidentiality is important." "Oh, you understand that, do you?" Price's tone dripped with condescension as he looked Anthony up and down, taking in the maintenance uniform. "Tell me, where exactly did you get your law degree? The back of a cereal box?" Anthony remained silent, studying Price's face. He could have identified himself right then, put this arrogant man in his place with a few simple words. But something held him back. This wasn't about his ego. This was about something much more important. Instead, he simply moved the bucket to one side. "Please be careful, the floor is still slippery." Price stepped forward, purposely walking through the section Anthony had just mopped, leaving footprints across the clean floor. "People like you should be grateful to even have jobs in this building," Price muttered as he passed, just loud enough for Anthony to hear. "Cleaning up after your betters." Anthony watched as the attorney rummaged through papers at the defense table, finding what he needed. As Price headed back toward the door, their eyes met briefly. There was no recognition in Price's gaze, just dismissal of someone he considered beneath his notice. Little did he know that the man in the janitor's uniform would be facing him in court tomorrow morning, not with a mop in hand, but with the full power of the federal government behind him. Anthony simply nodded respectfully as Price left, then returned to mopping up the footprints. Sometimes the most powerful response wasn't what you said, but what you chose to observe in silence. The morning sun streamed through the high windows of the courthouse, casting long rectangles of light across the marble floor. The building was coming alive with activity: lawyers clutching coffee cups and briefcases, clerks rushing with stacks of files, security guards checking IDs at the entrance. Wilson Price stormed through the main doors like a man on a mission. His perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders or the scowl etched on his face. Last night's loss still burned in his mind. 20 years of legal practice, and he rarely lost cases, especially not to some young hotshot prosecutor who seemed to have the jury eating out of his hand. "Mr. Price, Mr. Price," a young woman with a notebook hurried after him. "Any comment on yesterday's verdict?" Wilson didn't slow down. "No comment," he snapped without looking at her. The last thing he needed was reporters asking about his failure. The headlines would be bad enough already. Carmichael Industries found guilty of discrimination. His biggest client, his surest paycheck, now facing millions in damages. The reporter persisted, keeping pace. "Sources say this is the third discrimination suit against Carmichael in 5 years. Do you think this establishes a pattern that could affect their—" Wilson stopped abruptly, turning to face her. "I said no comment." And if you had any journalistic integrity, you'd wait until after the appeals process before writing your hit piece. The reporter flinched at his tone but scribbled his words anyway. Wilson pushed past her, heading toward the elevators. As the doors opened, his phone rang. "Price speaking," he answered, stepping inside. "Wilson, it's Richard Carmichael." The voice belonged to the CEO of Carmichael Industries, and he didn't sound happy. "I'm looking at the news. What the hell happened yesterday?" Wilson pressed the button for the 4th floor. "Rich, I know you're upset, but this is just round 1. We've already filed for appeal, and I've got 3 solid grounds for getting this verdict overturned. You told me this case was an easy win. Frivolous lawsuit. Those were your exact words." "No jury is perfectly predictable," Wilson replied, stepping out of the elevator. "But I've handled dozens of these discrimination suits. The appeal will—" "The board is meeting this afternoon," Carmichael interrupted. "They're questioning why we're paying your firm's ridiculous fees if you can't deliver results." Wilson felt his stomach tighten. Carmichael Industries represented nearly 30% of his firm's annual billing. "Rich, listen to me. This prosecutor got lucky. He's nobody special. I've reviewed his case file, and there are holes I can drive a truck through on appeal. Who is this guy anyway? I want to know what we're up against." Wilson reached his temporary office in the courthouse, fumbling with his key card. Some federal prosecutor named Anthony Clark, been with the Civil Rights Division about 15 years. Never faced him before yesterday. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Anthony Clark? The Anthony Clark?" Carmichael's voice had changed. "You know him?" "Everyone in business knows him, Wilson. He's taken down bigger companies than mine for discrimination, never lost a civil rights case. Word is he's being considered for a federal judgeship." Wilson felt the conversation slipping away from him. "Rich, I've handled tough prosecutors before. This Clark guy isn't—" "I'm late for a meeting," Carmichael cut him off. "Fix this, Wilson, or we'll find someone who can." The line went dead. Wilson stared at his phone, then slammed it down on the desk. This day was getting worse by the minute. He had another hearing in an hour. A different case, but now with the added pressure of knowing his biggest client was wavering. He needed to clear his head. Leaving his office, Wilson headed for the courthouse cafe. Maybe caffeine would help him focus. As he rounded the corner, a cleaning cart blocked the narrow hallway. "For God's sake," he muttered. "Can't they do this after hours?" An older man in a maintenance uniform was carefully wiping down the wooden paneling. When he heard Wilson approach, he turned and offered a polite nod. "Morning, sir. Just be a second here." Wilson checked his watch pointedly. "I don't have a second. Move your cart." The man's smile never wavered as he pushed his cart to one side, making just enough room for Wilson to squeeze past. "There you go, sir. Have a blessed day." Something about the man's calm demeanor irritated Wilson further. He squeezed past without acknowledging the courtesy, his shoulder bumping the cart and knocking a spray bottle to the floor. "Careful there," the maintenance man said, bending to pick it up. "You should be careful where you put your equipment," Wilson retorted without looking back. At the cafe, the line stretched nearly to the door. Wilson pushed his way toward the front, ignoring the glares from those he passed. "Excuse me," said a woman he cut in front of. "There's a line here." "I have a hearing in 40 minutes, Wilson replied, not bothering to turn around. "Some of us have actual important work to do in this building." The barista behind the counter frowned at him. "Sir, please go to the back of the line like everyone else." Wilson felt his face heating up. "Do you know how much I bill per hour? More than you make in a week. I don't have time for this." A tall black man in a security uniform stepped forward. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to respect the cafe rules or leave." Wilson opened his mouth to argue, but caught something in the security guard's steady gaze that made him reconsider. With a huff, he turned and stalked to the back of the line. The wait did nothing for his mood. By the time he finally got his coffee and headed back upstairs, Wilson had only 20 minutes before his hearing. He rounded the corner at full speed and collided with someone, sending hot coffee splashing across his crisp white shirt and expensive tie. "Watch where you're going," he shouted before he even looked up. "I'm very sorry, sir," came the reply. In a deep, calm voice, Wilson looked up, ready to continue his tirade, and froze. It was the janitor from last night, the one he'd berated in the courtroom. The man was still in his gray maintenance uniform, holding a mop, looking genuinely apologetic about the collision. "You!" Wilson sputtered, coffee dripping down his front. "Are you following me? Is this some kind of payback for last night?" The janitor's brow furrowed in confusion. "Payback? No, sir. It was an accident. Here, let me help." He pulled a clean cloth from his pocket and offered it to Wilson. Wilson knocked the hand away. "Don't touch me or my suit. Do you have any idea how much this costs?" Several people in the hallway had stopped to watch the scene. Wilson became aware of their stares, their judgment. It only fueled his anger. "What are you all looking at?" he snapped at the onlookers. "Don't you have jobs to do?" An older woman in a court clerk's uniform shook her head disapprovingly. "The gentleman was trying to help you, counselor." "I don't need help from the cleaning staff," Wilson said. "I need competent people who know their place and stay out of my way." The janitor said nothing, just regarded Wilson with a steady gaze that somehow made Wilson even more uncomfortable. There was something in those eyes, not anger or fear, but something like assessment, as if Wilson were being weighed and measured. "I don't have time for this," Wilson finally said, pushing past the janitor. "I have a hearing to prepare for." "Of course," the janitor replied quietly. "Good luck in your case today, Mr. Price." Wilson stopped and turned slowly. "How do you know my name?" The janitor smiled slightly. "You're well known in this courthouse." "Sir?" Without waiting for Wilson's response, the janitor returned to his mopping, humming softly as if the encounter had never happened. Wilson hurried away, but something about the exchange left him unsettled. How did a janitor know who he was? And why did it feel like the man was somehow laughing at him? Shaking off the strange feeling, Wilson entered the men's room to clean up his coffee-stained shirt as best he could. He had more important things to worry about than some maintenance worker. In less than 15 minutes, he needed to be ready for his hearing. Little did he know that his day was about to get much, much worse. Wilson Price checked his reflection in the bathroom mirror, dabbing at the coffee stains on his shirt with a damp paper towel. It wasn't working. The dark brown splash across his chest made him look like an amateur, not the high-powered attorney, whose clients paid $800 an hour for his services. "Perfect," he muttered to his reflection. "Just perfect." The bathroom door swung open, and a young man in a suit entered. Wilson recognized him as one of the junior attorneys from the public defender's office. "Big day in courtroom C, huh?" the young lawyer said conversationally as he washed his hands. Wilson glanced at him. "What's happening in C?" "The Thompson case. Federal prosecution against Duval Industries. Everyone's talking about it." Wilson frowned. Duval Industries was a competitor of Carmichael's, facing similar discrimination allegations. He'd been so focused on his own loss yesterday that he hadn't paid attention to the court schedule. "Who's prosecuting?" he asked, feigning casual interest. "Anthony Clark," the young lawyer replied, drying his hands. "Guy's a legend in civil rights cases. I'm going to try to watch some of it between my own hearings. They say he's never lost." Wilson's stomach tightened. Maybe he should watch this prosecutor in action, study his techniques for the Carmichael appeal. "Which courtroom did you say?" "C starts at 10. The young lawyer headed for the door, then paused. "Rough morning?" he asked, nodding at Wilson's stained shirt. "You could say that," Wilson replied stiffly. After the younger man left, Wilson made one last attempt to clean his shirt, then gave up. He'd have to stop by the department store on his lunch break and buy a new one. For now, he'd button his suit jacket to hide the worst of it. Wilson glanced at his watch. His own hearing wasn't until 11. He had time to observe some of the Duval case first. Maybe watching Clark in action would reveal some weakness, some technique he could counter in his appeal for Carmichael. Courtroom C was already filling up when Wilson arrived. He slipped into a seat in the back row, noticing several law students, and other attorneys similarly there to observe. A court case involving a major corporation like Duval was always of interest to the legal community. The defense team was already seated, looking nervous as they shuffled through papers. There was no sign of the prosecution yet. Wilson scanned the room, wondering which face belonged to the legendary Anthony Clark. Probably some Ivy League type with gray at the temples, he imagined. A side door opened, and the bailiff entered. All rise for Judge Harriet Green. Everyone stood as the judge took her seat. A stern-looking woman with short white hair and piercing eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Wilson had appeared before her once years ago. She was fair but uncompromising. "Be seated," Judge Green said, arranging her robes. "We're here for case number 47293, United States versus Duval Industries." She looked toward the tables before. "Her IC defense counsel is present. Where is the prosecution?" As if on cue, the main courtroom door opened. All heads turned as a tall black man in an impeccable navy suit strode confidently toward the front of the room. Wilson froze in his seat. It couldn't be. The janitor from last night and this morning was walking to the prosecutor's table, carrying a leather briefcase instead of a mop. Gone was the gray maintenance uniform, replaced by a suit that Wilson grudgingly noted was better tailored than his own. "Forgive my tardiness, Your Honor," the man said in that same deep, calm voice Wilson had heard just 30 minutes ago. But now that voice commanded the room, carrying authority that silenced even the whispers in the gallery. "Anthony Clark for the United States." Judge Green's expression softened slightly. "Mr. Clark, I understand you were concluding another case yesterday. Are you prepared to proceed today?" "Yes, Your Honor. The government is ready." Wilson felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. The janitor he'd insulted twice was Anthony Clark, the prosecutor who had never lost a civil rights case. The man Carmichael feared more than any other lawyer in the system. A cold sweat broke out on Wilson's forehead as the implications hit him. Clark had seen Wilson at his worst, arrogant, dismissive, prejudiced, and he'd said nothing, just watched and listened. The memory of his words from last night echoed in Wilson's mind. "People like you should be grateful to even have jobs in this building, cleaning up after your betters." Oh God, what had he done? Wilson barely registered the opening. Proceedings as his mind raced. Should he leave? No, that might draw attention. Should he approach Clark after court and apologize? Would that make things better or worse? He watched, transfixed, as Clark began his opening statement. Gone was any trace of the humble janitor. This Clark moved with confidence, spoke with precision, and commanded the jury's attention from his first word. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Clark began, making eye contact with each person in the jury box. "This case is about fairness. It's about the promise America makes to all its citizens that they will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin." Wilson found himself leaning forward, caught up despite himself in Clark's skillful narrative. The man was good, better than good. He wove facts and emotional appeals together seamlessly, building a compelling case that had several jurors nodding along within minutes. When Clark finished his opening statement, even the defense team looked worried. Wilson understood why now, why his client feared this man, why he had never lost a case. During a brief recess, Wilson slipped out of the courtroom, his mind still reeling. In the hallway, he nearly collided with his assistant, Diane, who was looking for him. "There you are, I've been calling you. Your hearing got moved up to 10:30. Judge Reyes is ready for you now in courtroom B." Wilson checked his watch. It was already 10:25. "Why wasn't I notified?" "I sent you 3 messages," Diane said, showing him her phone with the unread texts. "The clerk called our office 30 minutes ago." Wilson hurried toward courtroom B, straightening his jacket to hide the coffee stains. Just what he needed today, another opportunity to look unprepared. As he rushed down the hallway, he passed a group of maintenance workers changing a light fixture. One of them, an older man with kind eyes, called out, "Good luck in there, counselor." Wilson barely acknowledged him, too preoccupied with his thoughts. The janitor was Anthony Clark. The humble man with the mop was one of the most respected prosecutors in the state, and Wilson had treated him like dirt. What kind of man mopped floors at night when he could be celebrating a courtroom victory? What kind of person endured insults without revealing his identity? What did that say about Clark's character, and about Wilson's? For the first time in years, Wilson Price felt something unfamiliar. Shame. He paused outside courtroom B, taking a deep breath to compose himself. His case today was straightforward, a routine hearing that shouldn't take more than 30 minutes. But he couldn't focus. His mind kept returning to Clark, to his own behavior, to what might happen now. Would Clark mention their encounters to anyone? Would he use it against Wilson somehow? Or worst of all, would he simply continue as if nothing had happened, proving himself the better man in every way? Wilson pushed open the courtroom door, his confident facade firmly back in place despite the storm inside him. He had a job to do, a client to represent. His personal crisis would have to wait. But as he took his position at the defense table and prepared to speak, he couldn't shake the image of Anthony Clark in that maintenance uniform, watching him, measuring him, seeing the truth of who Wilson Price really was, and finding him wanting. The next week passed in a blur for Wilson Price. By day, he went through the motions of his legal work, client meetings, phone calls, paperwork, but his mind kept returning to Anthony Clark and their encounters. At night, he lay awake, replaying his own words, seeing again the calm dignity with which Clark had absorbed his insults while holding a mop. On Thursday morning, Wilson stood before his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie. Dark circles under his eyes betrayed his troubled sleep. His phone buzzed on the counter, another message from Richard Carmichael demanding updates on their appeal strategy. Wilson ignored it. Today was the final day of the Duval trial. He'd managed to sit in on portions of it throughout the week, watching as Anthony Clark systematically dismantled the defense's arguments. The man was brilliant, strategic, thorough, and somehow both forceful and gentle at the same time. The jury hung on his every word. How would he have handled the Carmichael case? Wilson found himself wondering, not for the first time. Wilson arrived at the courthouse early, slipping into courtroom C before it filled up. He chose a seat near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. As people filed in, he overheard snippets of conversation. Clear victory for the prosecution. Clark's closing argument is supposed to be legendary. Heard the judge might be considering sanctions against Duval. The courtroom hummed with anticipation. Legal observers, law students, and reporters filled the gallery. Important cases like this one were the closest thing the legal world had to spectator sports. Wilson noticed something else as he watched people enter, how differently they treated the courthouse staff compared to how he did. Attorneys greeted, security guards by name, nodded respectfully to the clerks, thanked the maintenance workers who held doors open. Small courtesies he'd always considered beneath his notice. A movement near the side entrance caught his attention. Anthony Clark had entered, speaking quietly with an older man in a maintenance uniform, the same man who had wished Wilson luck in the hallway days ago. They weren't talking like Prosecutor and Janitor, but like old friends, sharing a joke. That made them both laugh. As if sensing Wilson's gaze, Clark looked up. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Wilson expected to see contempt or triumph in the other man's face, some acknowledgement of the power shift between them. Instead, Clark simply nodded politely before returning to his conversation. That neutral courtesy somehow felt worse than any confrontation would have. The bailiff called the court to order and Judge Green entered. Everyone rose, then settled as the proceedings began. This was it. Closing arguments, the final chance for both sides to persuade the jury. The defense went first, making a last desperate attempt to paint Duval's actions as unfortunate misunderstandings rather than systematic discrimination. Their argument felt hollow even to Wilson's ears. Too many coincidences, too many excuses. Then it was Anthony Clark's turn. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket as he approached the jury. When he spoke, his voice was quiet at first, drawing everyone forward to listen. Ladies and gentlemen, when I was a boy, my grandfather told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "It's not the title that honors the person. It's the person that honors the title." Clark paced slowly before the jury box, making eye contact with each person. We've heard a lot about titles in this courtroom. Executive Vice President, Regional Manager, Director of Human Resources. Impressive. Titles that come with corner offices, company cars, and six-figure salaries. But a title alone doesn't make someone worthy of respect. He paused, letting his words sink in. Duval Industries wants you to respect their titles, their corporate structure, their place in the business world. But they've forgotten what my grandfather knew, that true respect must be earned through actions, not claimed through position. Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The words weren't directed at him, yet they cut deep all the same. The evidence has shown that at Duval Industries, your opportunities weren't determined by your qualifications, your work ethic, or your contributions. They were determined by your race. Time after time, qualified black employees were passed over for promotions that went to less qualified white candidates. Time after time, black employees received harsher discipline for the same infractions that were overlooked when committed by their white colleagues. Clark's voice remained measured, but it carried moral authority that filled the courtroom. This isn't about political correctness or hurt feelings. This is about fundamental fairness, about whether we truly believe that all people deserve the same opportunity to succeed based on their merit and hard work. As Clark continued, weaving together the evidence with the human stories behind them, Wilson found himself nodding along. The argument was masterful, not just legally sound but morally compelling. When Clark finished, the courtroom remained silent for several seconds, still under the spell of his words. Even the defense team looked resigned to their fate. Judge Green gave her instructions to the jury, and they filed out to begin deliberations. Most observers expected a quick verdict, perhaps by the end of the day. Wilson slipped out during the recess, stepping into the hallway to clear his head. He needed coffee, needed to think. As he walked toward the cafe, he noticed how differently he was seeing the courthouse now. The security guard whose name he'd never bothered to learn, the clerk whose greeting he'd always ignored, the maintenance worker who kept the floors spotless despite lawyers like Wilson tracking mud across them daily. His phone buzzed again. Carmichael again. With a sigh, Wilson answered. Price here. Wilson, the board meeting is set for tomorrow. They want to know our strategy moving forward. Wilson hesitated, then made a decision. Rich, we need to discuss settlement options. The evidence against us is strong, and fighting this through appeals will only... Settlement? Carmichael's voice rose. You said we had solid grounds for appeal. You said Clark got lucky. I was wrong, Wilson said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. I've been watching him in court all week. He's the real deal, Rich. And our case has the same problems as Duval's. If we drag this out, it will only cost more in the end, both in money and reputation. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm meeting with the board in an hour. I'll call you back. Wilson tucked his phone away and continued toward the cafe. As he rounded the corner, he nearly collided with someone coming from the other direction, Anthony Clark. They stood face to face for the first time since Wilson had discovered Clark's identity. Up close, Wilson could see the intelligence in the other man's eyes, the quiet confidence in his bearing. Mr. Clark? Wilson managed, his throat suddenly dry. Mr. Price? Clark replied evenly. How are you today? The simple courtesy, after everything that had happened, left Wilson speechless for a moment. No accusation, no triumph, no mention of their previous encounters. I've been watching your case against Duval, Wilson finally said. Impressive work. Thank you. Clark's expression revealed nothing, neither forgiveness nor condemnation. Wilson knew he should say more, should acknowledge what had happened, should apologize. The words formed in his mind but stuck in his throat. His entire career had been built on never admitting weakness, never conceding error. The jury should reach a verdict soon, Clark said, filling the awkward silence. These cases are always difficult but necessary, Wilson nodded. I recommended settlement to my client today, in the Carmichael case. Something flickered in Clark's eyes. Surprise, perhaps. That's a significant shift in strategy. Yes, Wilson admitted. But the right one, I think. Clark, studied him for a long moment, then offered his hand. "Good luck with your client, Mr. Price." Wilson shook it, noticing the strength in the other man's grip. As Clark turned to leave, Wilson found his voice again. "Mr. Clark?" Clark paused, looking back. "How do you do it?" Wilson asked. "Switch between roles like that?" From the courtroom, too. He couldn't quite bring himself to complete the question. Clark's expression softened slightly. "They're not different roles to me, Mr. Price. Just different ways of serving. The title doesn't matter. Only the purpose behind it." With that, he continued down the hallway, leaving Wilson with more questions than answers, but also with the first stirrings of something unfamiliar, a desire to be better than he had been. 6 months later, Wilson Price stood at the window of his new office. It was smaller than his old one, much smaller, in fact, but the view of the city park across the street made up for it. A light snow was falling, the first of the season, dusting the trees and benches with white. The door opened and his assistant poked her head in. "Your 2 o'clock is here." "Thanks, Liz. Send them in." Wilson turned from the window, straightening his tie. The sign on his door now read, "Price and Associates, Civil Rights Law." The brass letters still shone with newness. Richard Carmichael had not taken Wilson's settlement advice. Instead, he'd fired him on the spot, then hired another firm to continue fighting the discrimination case through appeals. They'd lost spectacularly 3 months ago, with damages nearly double what a settlement would have cost. The business papers had called it a stunning rebuke of corporate discrimination. Losing Carmichael Industries had meant losing his partnership at his old firm. A 20-year career gone in an afternoon. Strangely, Wilson had felt more relief than regret. He'd spent 2 weeks at home thinking, watching the news, reading case law he'd long ignored, actually seeing the people around him in his neighborhood for perhaps the first time. Something had shifted inside him, something that had started in that courthouse hallway when he'd realized who Anthony Clark really was. A young black couple entered his office, holding hands nervously. Both were dressed in their best clothes, not expensive but clean and pressed. The woman was pregnant, her free hand resting protectively on her belly. "Mr. and Mrs. Washington, please have a seat." Wilson gestured to the chairs across from his desk. "You mentioned housing discrimination when you called?" The man nodded, his jaw tight with restrained anger. "We applied for an apartment at Parkside Gardens. Good reviews, safe neighborhood, close to both our jobs. We had good credit, made 3 times the rent in income, no criminal records. But they kept finding reasons to delay our application." His wife continued. "My friend Jill, she's white, called about the same unit the next day. They told her it was available and she could move in immediately. She went with us to look at it, acting like she was the one renting. The manager couldn't have been nicer, until he saw us waiting in the car." Wilson nodded, taking notes. "And you have documentation of your application? Text messages? Emails?" They both nodded, and Mr. Washington placed a folder on the desk. "Everything's in here. We know it might not be a big case for someone like you, but every case is important," Wilson interrupted gently. "And housing discrimination is something I take very seriously now." The "now" slipped out before he could catch it, and the couple exchanged a quick glance. "I've heard you used to represent the other side," Mrs. Washington said carefully. "Companies accused of discrimination." Wilson set down his pen. "Yes, I did that work for nearly 20 years. He looked them directly in the eyes. "And I was very good at it. That's why I can help you now. I know exactly how they think, how they'll try to defend themselves, what evidence matters most." "What made you change?" Mr. Washington asked bluntly. Wilson considered the question. He could give the easy answer, say something about justice and fairness that sounded good, but these people were trusting him with something important. They deserved the truth. "I met someone who showed me what real integrity looks like. Not by preaching at me or trying to change me, but just by being himself. He made me see that I had spent my career making excuses for inexcusable behavior." Wilson paused. "And I didn't like who I had become." Something in his honesty seemed to satisfy them. The tension in the room eased slightly. "Well," said Mr. Washington with a small smile, Their loss is our gain, I guess. They spent the next hour going through details, building the framework of a case. When the couple left, Wilson felt the familiar rush that came with good legal work, but different now, cleaner somehow. This wasn't about billable hours or winning at all costs. This was about setting something right. That evening, Wilson stayed late at the office reviewing the Washington's documents. Winter darkness had fallen hours ago, and most of the other businesses in the building were closed. He heard the familiar sound of a vacuum in the hallway, the cleaning crew making their rounds. A knock at his open door made him look up. An older man in a maintenance uniform stood there, vacuum cleaner humming at his side. "Sorry to disturb you, sir. Just need to get your trash." "Of course, come in." Wilson stood and moved aside, suddenly conscious of the man in a way he never would have been before. "Working late tonight?" "Always do on Tuesdays." The man emptied the small wastebasket into his larger bin. "You're new in this building, aren't you? Moved in last month?" "That's right." Wilson extended his hand. "Wilson Price." The maintenance worker looked surprised but shook his hand with a strong grip. "Ray Johnson. Nice to meet you properly." "You too, Mr. Johnson." Wilson found himself genuinely curious. "Been working here long?" 12 years next spring, Ray said proudly. "Started when my youngest was still in college. Now she's a doctor, if you can believe it." "That's impressive," Wilson said, meaning it. "You must be very proud. Every day." Ray glanced at the papers spread across Wilson's desk. "You're working late too, I see. New case, housing discrimination." Ray nodded thoughtfully. "Important work. My sister's family faced that back in the 90s. Tough to prove, tougher to fix." "I'm learning that," Wilson admitted. "It's not the kind of law I practiced before." Something in his tone must have revealed more than he intended. Ray studied him for a moment, then said simply, "Never too late to make a change, Mr. Price. My wife became a teacher at 50. Best decision she ever made." "Your wife sounds wise." "That she is." Ray moved toward the door with his cart. "I'll let you get back to work." "Good night, sir." "Wilson," he corrected. "And good night, Ray." After the maintenance man left, Wilson sat back in his chair thinking. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have even noticed the man, let alone learned his name or heard about his daughter, the doctor. Such a small thing, really. A brief human conversation, yet it represented everything that had changed. His phone rang, pulling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Wilson Price speaking. "Mr. Price. Anthony Clark here." Wilson sat up straighter, a reflex. "Mr. Clark, this is unexpected. I hope I'm not disturbing you." Clark's voice was exactly as Wilson remembered it. Deep, measured, thoughtful. "Not at all. What can I do for you?" "I saw the filing in the Washington case today. Your name caught my attention." Wilson felt a moment of anxiety. "Is there a problem with the filing?" "No, not at all. Quite the opposite. It's very well done." A brief pause. "I was surprised to see you on that side of a discrimination case." "Life is full of surprises," Wilson said, thinking of their first meeting. Him in his expensive suit, Clark in a janitor's uniform. "Indeed, it is." Something like approval warmed Clark's voice. "I'm actually calling because I'm putting together a task force on housing discrimination. The county executive is backing it, and we need experienced attorneys. Given your unique perspective, I thought you might be interested." Wilson was momentarily speechless. "You want me on your task force?" "After how I behaved when we met." Clark chuckled softly. "Mr. Price, if I only worked with people who had never made mistakes, I'd be working alone. What matters isn't where we start, but where we choose to go next." Wilson thought of the Washingtons, of Ray Johnson, of all the people he'd overlooked or dismissed throughout his career. "I'd be honored to join your task force." "Excellent. We meet next Tuesday evening. I'll have my assistant send you the details." Clark paused again. "And Wilson, change isn't easy. I respect what you're doing." After they said goodbye, Wilson sat in his quiet office for a long time. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the park in a clean white blanket, not erasing what lay beneath but transforming it into something new. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago and the man he was trying to become now. The journey wasn't finished, might never be finished, but for the first time in years, Wilson Price felt like he was moving in the right direction, and sometimes that's enough.